I've always wanted to make this video as I've played every Assassin's Creed game and endlessly analyzed the various narrative threads, both from a lore perspective and from a purely artistic and literary standpoint. Today I'll discuss this second aspect, which is often overlooked when discussing the writing in various Assassin's Creed games, often preferring to focus on the lore or the character arcs. This video explains my opinion on what could be done to improve the narrative and writing of Assassin's Creed. It won't be an easy video, but I really care about this because I believe Assassin's Creed can be more. It can truly analyze certain aspects of society in a very in-depth way, even through historical fiction, something that has been done in literature over and over again since the past, where writers like Shakespeare or Dante Alighieri or Alessandro Manzoni took history, studied it and used it as a narrative pretext to analyze social aspects that are common to everyone, both in the past and present and even in the future. And since video games are also a medium comparable today to movies and literature, but with the interactive nature in it, the intrinsic potential of an historical game that uses the narrative license of the struggle between Assassins and Templars to analyze and deconstruct what the human mind does and fights in relation to power games and social class struggle is infinite. Assassin's Creed has actually already done this, exploiting this potential to say something, and it was certainly an important factor in determining its success among the public. One example is Altair, who has been manipulated by his own mentor, the man who raised him, exploiting his sense of guilt toward the Brotherhood and ambition to assassinate people who certainly did evil things, but were in Al-Mualim's side only because they knew who the mentor of the assassins really was. And already in Assassin's Creed 1 we see how every Templar at the beginning seems like a fair, powerful and objectively evil person, but every time they are assassinated, they show their most miserable side, miserable in the sense of human misery, which is the fact that death stops all ambition and power. Everyone is put on the same level, and only then a person's true color and true motivations are shown. Everyone is more or less afraid of death, and does things that push them away from that fear. Power is nothing more than the illusion of being protected from the dangers that life gives us, while everything can kill us. As soon as Altair struck his enemies, this armor is destroyed and some appeared fearful, some appeared proud of protecting their ideas, some sought a final dialogue with Altair to make him understand how deluded and conditioned he was by the power of Al-Mualim, as much as the people were deluded and conditioned by the power of the Templars. There are also those who show resentment towards the social class because they are different from them and have always been ridiculed for it. There is only one exception, Majid ad-Din, a person who received power and used it to harm people for no reason, simply because he enjoyed determining the fate of the others. Why this character is there with so many other characters with grey morals? Because even in real life there are those who do evil for the pleasure of doing so, and this only fits into a pattern that is actually less schematic than one might think. No one can predict the reason why a person makes certain choices, from the noblest to the most ignoble ones. The fact remains that we decide what is noble and what is ignoble in our consciousness, and this opens up a range of actions that people can do for personal motivations that we cannot understand from the outside. A group like the Assassins, who take people's lives because they use their free will in a way they consider wrong, exposes a fundamental hypocrisy, which can outline that there are actions that must be done because they are the lesser evil, even though they are still evil. All these things, these values and these contradictions are part of human nature, and even people who lived 2000 years ago can experience certain emotions just as we do today. This is why the history of human beings is so interesting. and this is why this franchise has immense potential. I took Assassin's Creed 1 as an example because although other games also deal with these themes, also AC2, which deals with the grief and revenge being just one of the many ways to deal with injustice and grief, to AC3, which explores how people can determine their own self-destruction through political games and through their own efforts to prevent this from happening, leading characters like Connor to be guilty of hubris throughout the game, only to find himself being the indirect architect of the new world that ousted his own people. Nonetheless, only Assassin's Creed 1 deals with these themes with a rawness and spontaneity of writing that shows us how human nature works in a very realistic way. Even so, AC4 Black Flag explores the psyche of the characters in a way as convincing as AC1 in my opinion, since all the characters in the game are morally grey, and they are all important for Edward's growth, and perhaps it is the only game together with AC1 that actually explores unusual themes for a video game. It uses the conflicts between the Assassins and the Templars to tell a story about how the changes taking place in a society push outsiders to find their own way into unorthodox manners, and for this reason, the authorities who control their already consolidated power do everything to prevent these outsiders from showing how anyone can achieve their goals with their own strength, despite everything going against them. But to do this, the game warns us. You have to take difficult paths, and you have to sacrifice a lot, and you have to put your friends and your family in danger, and Edward was not able to handle this responsibility, and everyone paid for it, and this is where the assassins come into play, to give Edward rules and a balance to allow him to move forward with a well-defined purpose, and at the same time to remain an outsider. I think this is the focus that Assassin's Creed must always stick to in order to improve its narrative, that is, using society, the efforts of society, and individuals to tell stories and also show human misery, pain, terror without filters, but at the same time showing the good that can be in everyone if only society and power had not pushed them in different directions. Unfortunately, Assassin's Creed since then became an anthology franchise that has opened the door to very simplified narratives, with heroes and villains, with the villains occasionally instilling doubt, but the hero remains the hero and always find contradiction to demonstrate that the villain is still evil, despite their smooth talking. It's a classical Hollywood method that's been around since the days of James Bond, and this type of plot helps reuse the same themes and characters archetypes over and over again, creating a sort of endlessly recurring series. I'm not going to lecture Ubisoft now. Although I would have been happy if Assassin's Creed had a closure, I fully understand that a series with this potential and that makes so much money must continue to exist because you can literally explore the entire history of humanity, game by game. But what if I told you that you could actually continue to serialize Assassin's Creed and at the same time offer a more complex narrative, using history precisely to show how humanity has reacted to various changes in society and power, precisely by using Assassins and Templars to show how these two groups are more allegories of the methods humans use to resolve their internal conflicts and achieve their goals. What if I told you there's no need to simplify a game's story or plot to keep it going forever? After all, history is infinite. Events repeat themselves, but the characters change, the details change, but cyclically, we always have intrinsic mechanisms that repeat themselves and are always interesting to explore, precisely because we, as human beings, are infinitely limited and will never discover the secret behind the meaning of life. Therefore, we will always be driven to seek answers in history, and Assassin's Creed can easily explore these themes in a bold and complex way without stopping people from buying games in this series, because the curiosity of having these narratives of complex characters, hidden history, and intersecting motivations will always be interesting. What does this mean in more concrete terms? Let's imagine how the first Assassin's Creed games handled genetic memories. Using the Animus was the equivalent of realizing what the mind of Desmond's ancestors was processing in his head during the often traumatic events that they experienced in first hand. From a meta-narrative point of view, we can say that the music we hear in-game or the color palette is the projection of the feeling that Desmond's ancestors was experiencing. Let's imagine the dark chants of AC1. Altair was an unbeliever who was, however, immersed in a world and a place where religion was everything, a moral beacon that clashed with the material poverty in which people lived. This is what we feel in Acre and Jerusalem. In Damascus, instead, we feel the warmth and wealth of a cosmopolitan city that, however, also hides a certain underlying uneasiness, a sort of decadence that too much well-being brings. In fact, Damascus is not a city that makes you feel at ease, despite being beautiful and colorful. At the same way, Jerusalem and Acre, despite being miserable and generally poor, they also seem comforting because the illusion of religion and spirituality is what moved people to move forward in those places despite the ongoing war and violence. This is also a type of narration, indirect but still narration. We don't need to spell it out in words, as I've often seen in the latest installment of the series. In fact, this is another problem with modern Assassin's Creed games. Sometimes we need to let the settings, surroundings, and the environmental narrative to speak for us, not just the writing. We shouldn't overexpose everything. Sometimes we just need the setting to speak for themselves and the characters to be people who live and breathe in that context and act according to the conditions they face. For example, Garnier de Naplouse, William of Montferrat, and Sibrand are three historical figures who, in any other medium, would perhaps be seen as epic figures. One is the master of the Hospitallers, the one is a noble soldier during the Crusades, and the third is the master of the Teutonic Order. Yet, AC1 gives us a rather miserable and tragic portrayal of these three characters. They are there to maintain power in an hostile and war-torn place, teeming with death, violence, and misery. So they too consequently reflect this state of mind. Garnier is a man, a doctor, hardened by the fact that he has seen so many patients die, and he was also desperate because he no longer has the piece of Eden that allowed him to cure them and use them as soldiers. His cynical and cruel nature emerged because he is now anesthetized to feel true empathy for those patients. He sees them die every day, one more, one less. It certainly doesn't change anything for him. William of Montferrat is a ruthless and harsh warmonger. He demands excessive discipline because he wants to bring order to this place marked by chaos and destruction, and he uses an iron fist. He too is a person marked by his environment, and his harshness is also what led to his distrust in the eyes of the King of England, and this brings to his isolation and death. Sibrand is also a ruthless and paranoid man. He has seen all his colleagues die and is afraid of suffering the same fate. Unlike the religious context of Acre and the Templars, he is an atheist and an unbeliever, and he is afraid of dying and drives him to be increasingly irrational, and he practically leads Altair before him while trying to avoid his fate. Damascus, on the other hand, is a prosperous city, and this prosperity brings decadence. Tamir is a merchant and uses work to his advantage, and simultaneously arms the Templars. He uses profit itself as a weapon, killing merchants who aren't 100% on his side. He is a miserable man who operates in the poor districts, using the poor people to enrich himself. Rich people like Abul Nukud, the city governor, are in their mansion, keeping the nobles happy, and they are the symbol of decadence. But behind his wealth lies a resentful person, likely a homosexual who has suffered oppression throughout his life, and who, as an outlet, has used his wealth lavishly. As soon as the Templars gave him the opportunity to create a new world order, he thought he could take revenge by trying to eliminate the noble classes that had probably also placed him in power. The city's decadence is something that the third Templar of Damascus, Jubair, is trying to combat. He believes that books and culture only cause harm and decline, and so he wants to burn on the knowledge, as well as those who seek to protect it. Jubair's reactionary attitude contrasts somewhat with the merchant's king Hoffman's. It seems strange that he agreed with him, but Jubair is someone who saw the opportunity of a new era to create his own ideal environment in his own image and likeness. So, the two main goals were compatible, and the Templars would have given them that. Here we see human ambition at work, and how man blindly follows whoever gives him a purpose to live for. Jerusalem, on the other hand, despite being the cradle of the three major monotheistic religions, is focused on politics and boasts a facade of prosperity. In reality, however, it is plagued by endemic poverty and endless human misery. Talal exploits these people's plight to convince them to work for him. This work involves forced slavery, as he must send these people to Acre to be treated by Garnier. He operates from a warehouse protected by the authorities and far from the public eye. A bit like today's capitalist cities, despite their prosperous facades, in the shadows and out of sight of the people lies the exploitation that contributes to the prosperity of the powerful figures. Powerful figures like Majd ad-Din, whom the Templars placed there as a distraction and to eliminate those who lacked a Templar mentality. What purpose this destruction served? It was needed to manage an intricate political plot whereby the Crusaders and the Saracens would unite in a common cause against the one who was ordering this political assassination, namely Al-Mualim. So I've taken these examples to show you how narrative and setting go hand in hand. I too often see settings that are beautiful or bleak for the sake of being like that, a problem that Assassin's Creed has had, in my opinion, since Syndicate, with exception like Origins, which shows the contrast between Greek colonization, the plight of the natives, and the new Roman Empire that was about to develop, which are linked to Bayek's journey. And we also see Bayek itself showing his reactionary political view against the Greek and Roman culture, and this gives him character depth. Valhalla, which created a poetic version of the 9th century England, with Roman ruins serving as a reminder that even the greatest empire falls, and also to show the death of the ancient world and the birth of the modern world. Valhalla unquestionably deals with various themes related to human ambitions, to the fact that his new world opens up new opportunities forever, but also for Christians. But structurally, it has more of a literary value linked to the Norse sagas than a cohesive story about human nature, despite touching on all of these aspects in a very profound way. To have this plot depth, however, you also need a good presentation. I don't expect to have the presentation of Naughty Dog's games, but at least to have cutscenes with good mock-up for the whole story, like in Black Flag and Origins. Why did Origins work? Because despite its plot, which in my opinion greatly simplified the character morality, with a morally infallible hero and the villains lacking any real motivation and doing unjustified things, what won over fans were the actors' performances, the quality of the cutscenes, and the dramatic, unsettling, and even theatrical tone of the dialogue and the scenes. The protagonist's emotions are made explicit, whether it's by anger, Aya's coldness, the extreme and even disturbing passion between Bayek and Aya for their bodies and the pleasure of killing the people who caused their son's death. Everything is perfectly expressed and striking, despite the plot not being the deepest. If we combine Origin's presentation with IC1's narrative depth, we would have a perfect compromise. AC Shadows is a special case because it tried to do this, but it failed. Because it is true that they tried to put serious arguments on the table, but the presentation was not up to par at all. And above all, whoever brought the game did not understand, in my opinion, how morality is really complex, and sometimes the solutions that the game proposes are naive or even counterproductive or inconsistent. We have the illusion that we are talking about important themes, but they are all addressed with a certain underlying superficiality in the implementation. And I think that Ubisoft should distance itself as much as possible from this sort of interpretation of history and events through the mentality of the 21st century, and instead stick more to the sources and literature, read a lot on the subject, and use these ideas to give greater complexity to the characters, link the context in which they live to their personalities, and create a link between setting, historical context, mentality of the time, and personality, as well as great representation of human morality. That in that manner we can raise more questions to the player than answers. There is a need for the player to question what he sees and think about it, to have some opinions, but that in the end the plot really must embody that sort of relativism that the phrase "nothing is true, everything is permitted" embodies. Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 3, Black Flag and Valhalla have the merit of showing that the events they are part of are filtered by their point of view, by their method and by their personal sense of justice. We side with the protagonist only because we see things from his lens, and the fact that we play memories also make this element very relative and imprecise, because the human mind, it is proven, bends things based on one's point of view, and perhaps they are not watching something for what it is, but for what they feel it is. And for this reason, I think that we need to return to this concept and perhaps even more emphasize with the fact that everyone has their own version of the same fact. And it is interesting to think that maybe if we had played in Ethan's shoes for the entire game in AC3, we would perhaps have had a completely different perspective of the plot, and even some events would be shaped differently based on the emotions that Haytham had felt. And history is the perfect backdrop to allow for certain reflections, because literally studying history is reading sources from two or more sides, and everyone has their own version that often totally contradicts the other, and all the versions can be valid until proven otherwise. And all this is part of the way we human beings are, subjective beings who measure things based on our ego, and what who often do not see from other point of view. If Assassin's Creed managed to rediscover these themes and refine the presentation throughout a skillful use of technology and writing to express human emotions and also the human misery present in all of us, even the psychological condition of each one in a more in-depth manner, we could actually have works of art, not just video games, and doing so it is not insensitive or culturally wrong. History by its very nature is diverse, and we can all be represented to showcase that. But the important thing is that we show the complexity and rawness of the world in a certain way, realistically and with an understanding of how societies function and how complex the world is. This has been done in many games, like The Last of Us or Red Dead Redemption, and Assassin's Creed has the potential to advance even more mature and complex storylines. I hope the next game, Assassin's Creed Hexe, which will tackle very sensitive themes, can showcase exactly what I'm talking about. If you enjoyed this video, just make sure to leave a like and subscribe. See you next time.
Please, don't do this.
You are afraid,
Of course I am afraid.
but you'll be safe now, held in the arms of your god.
Have my brothers taught you nothing? I know what waits for me. For all of us.
If not your god, then what?
Nothing. Nothing waits. And that is what I fear.
You don't believe.
How could I, given what I know? What I've seen? Our treasure was the proof.
Proof of what?
That this life is all we have.
Linger a while longer then, and tell me of the part you were to play.
A blockade by sea. To keep the fool kings and queens from sending reinforcements. Once we...
Conquered the Holy Land?
freed it, you fool. From the tyranny of faith.
Freedom? You worked to overthrow cities, control men's minds, murdered any who spoke against you.
I followed my orders, believing in my cause. Same as you.